Good evening, everybody, and welcome into another episode of New England Sports Weekly. As always, I am your host, Sean Metcalf, and I prematurely apologize if there's a lot of stops and starts and coughing and hacking. As I told you guys last week, if you looked at the Facebook post, I had a cold or sinus infection or whatever it may be. So I'm feeling better, but it's still left over and I'm still hacking up a bunch of junk. So it is not going to, so it's not pretty, but my voice isn't back to 100%, but at least it's going to be good enough that we can get this show on the road, so to speak, especially now that it is 24 hours, actually 23 hours and 45 minutes, basically, if you want to look at it that way, from the NFL draft. Wasn't going to miss this show for you because this is one of my, well, I mean, it's sports, so everything is my favorite, but it's one of the favorite shows that I like to do as far as get into the Patriots' needs, the wants, and everything in between as far as what's going to happen here for your New England Patriots and what's going to affect their future from down the road. But we do have a few other things to get into here as well before we get into our special tonight of the NFL draft, as it is the Celtics and Red Sox are also currently, well, not tonight currently playing, but they are both in season. And of course, if you don't know by now, but the Boston Celtics have swept the New York Nets, or the Brooklyn Nets at this point. So they are heading on to the next round. So we will get into that a little bit here as well, and the struggles of the Red Sox. But without further ado, because it's going to be a jam-packed show here tonight for you folks, we will get into the Out of the Box segment here, and that is brought to you by me. No sponsors as of yet, but maybe someday. If you want to sponsor the show, hit me up, tweet me at my personal at Sean_Met28, or hit me up, same on Instagram as well. Or you can tweet me at the show account at NE Sports Weekly if you want to maybe sponsor a segment or two here on the show. But with Out of the Box, we will get right into it here. As we mentioned off the top, Boston Celtics, who were the number 2 seed, but had to face one of probably the most not unassuming, but as far as maybe the least number 7 seed of all time, if you want to put it that way, with the Brooklyn Nets, who probably, if they were healthy and Kyrie didn't have to deal with all the stupid vaccine stuff, and they didn't have everything going on with James Harden, and if they had figured things out earlier, who knows, they probably would have been somewhere in the top 4 seeds. But nonetheless, they were a 7 seed. Boston was the number 2 seed. And of course, that, as I told you before the playoffs started, was probably the last thing I wanted them to do was play Brooklyn. And wow, do I have major egg on my face, but I will gladly take it, because I as I told you, I still picked the Celtics to win the series in 6. I thought Brooklyn was going to put way more than a fight than they did, but the Boston Celtics came away with not just a series victory, but a sweep of Kevin Durant and that little bitch known as Kyrie Irving. So they swept the Nets, and now they await the victor of the Milwaukee Bucks and Chicago. I was going to say Cleveland Cavs. Wow. They're out of the playoffs now after losing their play-in. But they await the Milwaukee Bucks, this winner of the Milwaukee Bucks and Chicago Bulls series. So we will see how that goes as that series is underway tonight. We'll see if the Bucks, who have a 3-1 series lead, can close it out, which I would imagine they would. But that is how things shook out for the Boston Celtics. We'll break that series down here in a little bit as well. And, of course, The Boston Red Sox, who are getting ready to finish up the month of April, because by the next time we have a show, it'll be May, folks. Well, how this month has flown by. But the Boston Red Sox are getting ready to wrap up the month, and they are doing so not so much in style, but they are kicking and dragging themselves to the end of this month. It has been one interesting ride to start the season, to say the least. The Red Sox have lost 6 of their last 7, and the bullpen has absolutely imploded. Now, of course, wasn't on the air last week, so the Red Sox have been dealing with some issues when it came to COVID. They did end up getting their 2 catchers back in Kevin Plawecki and Christian Vasquez, who were both placed on the COVID list, but both of them were vaccinated, so they were able to come back sooner. And then also Alex Cora was placed on the COVID list as well. So he is back with the club tonight, actually. This was his first day game back behind the bench for the Red Sox, as Will Venable was the acting manager for about 5 games, if I'm correct. But the big thing, though, was heading up to Toronto. We knew that Tanner Houck was not vaccinated. That was the news that broke a week and a half ago or so. So they knew that they were going to be without Tanner. And then on top of that, we found out that the only other one, at least on the active roster, was Cutter Crawford. So you lost a starter and a bullpen arm. And Cutter Crawford's been decent so far. I mean, so far he hasn't really carved out his full-time role yet, still trying to figure out what it's going to be. But of course, the big one, though, was Tanner Houck, where that really kind of threw a monkey wrench into the Red Sox plans, is because they had to move Garrett Whitlock into the starting rotation. And of course, with Rich Hill having to miss some time because unforeseen circumstances with his father passing away, he was on bereavement leave. So they really threw their plans through the loop that they had already made so that they could try to have Whitlock basically cover for, or really only have Houck have one kind of start over this whole road trip, I guess, or at least over the Toronto series, where basically they would have maneuvered it where it really wouldn't have affected them as bad as it has. But of course, you can't say anything bad in this case, because obviously this was unforeseen, where obviously somebody's father passes away and you wish Rich Hill the best, and you have your thoughts. Obviously, that's a whole human situation. So that's very, very understandable. So that's something you can't really control. But the Tanner Houck thing, you knew that was coming. You knew you have 9 games in Toronto, so that was a whole situation in and of itself. I'll get into that here in a little bit, but that was the big news moving forward. And then the Boston Bruins, who are getting back and getting healthy, as David Pastrnak and Hampus Lindholm have finally come back. They have played in a couple games here. Bruce Cassidy has strategically given them a couple days off here and there. We'll see how things kind of shake out, as there's only a couple games left before the NHL playoffs will start, supposedly on May 2nd, May 3rd, somewhere in that vicinity. So they are wrapping things up, but that is good news there on that front, as they get 2 of their big stars back, and they get their best scorer in David Pastrnak. And Brad Marchand looks like he's finally getting out of that slump that I believe it was 10 games in a row, 11 games that he did not have a goal. He had points, he had his assists, but did not have any goals. Finally broke out of that funk the other night. So we'll see how things wrap up for the Boston Bruins, and if they get healthy and they are back to close to 100% as we head into the playoffs, I feel a lot better about that situation, because for about a week and a half, 2 weeks or so, with Pasta and Lindholm out, it was just so frustrating. And you knew it was the talent wasn't the issue. It was more a standpoint of health from the Boston Bruins, because we all know that maybe this might not be the best Bruins team that we've seen in a long time, but it definitely, they are not devoid of talent. And I think getting that Hampus Lindholm the defensive core probably is the most talented defensive core I've seen in a long time now, but offensively, getting Pasta back and strengthening that back up, then you feel a lot better now. So it's going to be, all these teams that are in the playoffs you could really throw a dart, and any of these could win a Stanley Cup. I know everybody wants to use the cliche, oh yeah, and any year, hockey's the one sport where anybody gets hot, just get that good goaltender, you can go to a cup and win a cup, which is true. We saw that back in 2012 with the Los Angeles Kings, and countless other times in the NHL as well. But this really is a loaded Eastern Conference in the NHL, because the Bruins, who are a 90-plus point win team, get close to 100 points. You have multiple 100-plus point teams. It's in loaded teams in Carolina, Toronto, Boston, and of course, Tampa Bay as well, and the Florida Panthers. So there's 5 teams right there, just to name some of them in the Eastern Conference, that you could look at any of those teams and be like, yeah, any of those teams have a legitimate shot at winning the Stanley Cup. Now, obviously, odds on the Panthers and the Canes, and if you want to throw Tampa Bay in there, and seeing as they're defending Cup champs, although they're dealing with a few injuries, though any of those 3 teams you would probably put above the others, but still, the teams, like I said, like the Bruins, have a legitimate shot at the Cup. They're not just a 8 seed. You get in there, maybe you get hot, you might have a decent chance, but no, any of these teams actually have a pretty solid shot at actually pulling things off and winning a Cup. So that is your out of the box segment for this week. Here we will jump right into the Boston Celtics, who we mentioned swept the Brooklyn Nets. Oh, it was so good. So good to see the Boston Celtics sweep the Brooklyn Nets and kick Kyrie out of the postseason. I really don't have as much against KD as I do Kyrie. As you all know, I am a big time supporter of the Kyrie Irving hate club. That sounds bad, but the anti Kyrie, or I don't know. I am so far on the, I am against Kyrie. Kyrie just drives me up a wall, drives me crazy. I just hate watching Kyrie. He's just such a fake fraud. And after everything that he said in Boston, turned the back on Celtics fans. And in that 2019 playoff series, I believe it was, that's where he had to leave and get a surgery for a deviated septum, which wasn't causing any major medical problems at the time. And he basically just left the Celtics to go get an elective surgery. And of course, having to fight with some very well-respected NBA writers in this town, with those exchanges that he had, basically trying to say that he's smarter than them and calling out writers for no reason. And it was embarrassing, the look that he had going out the door. And of course, everything since, when he was in Brooklyn, when he had that situation where he missed time for quote unquote personal reasons. And he was at his sister's birthday party, but it wasn't like, oh, at a home. It was like, oh, out at a club. So he's stepped in it so many times and trying to use the whole, well, when anything goes wrong, it's, well, there are bigger things in this world. I'm focusing on this. I'm trying to help this, and this, trying to act like you're some big uh, philanthropic effort going on out there for you. But no, it's just all fake. And the old kumbaya Zen thing he's trying to portray. And then, of course, what happens in this series in game one, he gets back into an FU flipping the bird match to Boston Celtics fans. That was hilarious. But it was so nice to see that the Boston Celtics ended up sweeping the Nets. Now, looking at the actual series, how this whole thing went down, it was just ridiculous. The Celtics defense, who you knew were one of the best defenses in the league, but when it comes to the NBA, when it comes to the playoffs, especially when you have teams like the Nets that have Kevin Durant, have Kyrie Irvings, have these superstars that just look over the last 5-10 years in the NBA. Guys like LeBron, KD, maybe not Steph Curry. He might be a little bit the exception to the rule, but just look at all the superstars that know that their team's going to make it to the playoffs. They don't expend as much energy. They end up with a 4 seed, 3 seed. They don't go balls to the walls. They're saving everything for the playoffs. And of course, when the playoffs come, they flip the switch and they're able to dominate in the playoffs. But the Boston Celtics, who I was just not expecting much from them this year. I thought they'd be in that play-in game tournament, then or have a possibility of an 8-7 seed, maybe at best a 6 seed. I didn't think that they would be a number 2 seed, but after the turn of the calendar, after January 1st of this year, it has been a wholesale change. And I think it was just they needed time to figure themselves out, figure out the coaching style of Ime Udoka, and just really see what he's all about. And of course, I know, obviously, they wanted him as their head coach. That was pretty much with Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown with playing for him on Team USA in tournaments, and obviously Team Durant with playing with not Durant, I'm sorry, but Jason Tatum playing for him on Team USA in the Olympics as well. So it's just been, they had to have that feeling out process. And man, after the turn of the year, that they talking about flipping a switch, the Celtics did exactly that. They figured out just how good they could be all around, but especially on the defensive side of the ball. Now, of course, Marcus Smart won the Defensive Player of the Year award. Robert Williams was in that discussion as well before he got hurt in the last 2-3 weeks of the season, or month of the season, excuse me. And it was just a total turnaround. Of course, you had the scoring coming from Tatum and from Brown. And you had Grant Williams, who turned himself into a pretty solid 3-point shooter. Of course, the offense was there, but it was more that defense is really what turned this team around. And you saw it in this series against the Nets. You saw that come to play, and you saw them absolutely lock down Kevin Durant. Yeah, he had a decent game too, had over, I believe it was 27 points in that game, but a lot of it came from free throw attempts. He had a ridiculous amount of, 14, 15 free throw attempts, something along those lines. So he really wasn't comfortable out there shooting on the floor for most of that night. It basically came from the free throws. And of course, Kevin Durant tried to put this team on his back in game 4 as well. It almost worked if it wasn't for the goddamn referees fouling out Tatum, that was an utter disgrace, because that was not a foul. That was not even close to a foul. talk about that here in a second. But really, though, getting back to the point there is with the defense for the Boston Celtics, that was the big thing for them. They really locked down both superstars. Both of them had one or two decent games. And obviously, Kyrie, game one, had the 39 points, but then the Celtics ripped out the Nets' heart that night. One at the buzzer on a layup by Jason Tatum. And after that, it was pretty much not all downhill from there. I thought if they could win game number two, then that really was going to put a stake in their heart the way that things ended after game one. And boy, did it ever. And like I said, I still thought that after game two, I thought maybe this is going to end in a gentleman's sweep, but it was just an old fashioned just sweep in this case. So the Celtics really showed what they're all about on defense, and it wasn't just one man just on one guy all the time. It wasn't just like Al Horford all the time on Kevin Durant or on their center, or not just like Jason Tatum all the time on Durant. They flipped things around. They did a good job of switching up on defense, but of course, and Jason Tatum's main goal in this series was to be like glue on Kevin Durant and lock him down. And he did a really good job. And then that's the one thing you have to give Jason Tatum credit for this year, especially the second half, was really stepping up his game defensively. We all know how good he is offensively on the court for the Celtics. He is amazing. He's a stud offensively. But to take his game to the next level, you need to see defensively, and that's what he's done this year. He's emerged into that conversation for top 5 players in the league. That's how good he's been this year. And Jason Tatum really showing us all what he's all about, what he's really capable of. And of course, in this series, even in, I believe it was game 3, he ended up finishing with 19 points in the night. He had a solid night, but for most of that game, he was being held scoreless. But it wasn't just this, like in the past, it was like, oh, if he didn't score, it wasn't like, he's decent on defense. Yeah. But you had to rely on the rest of the team defensively. But this year, he's really stepped his game up, and he came to play, was out there on defense, was passing the ball, getting the rest of his teammates involved. He's really stepped it up. And the rest of the Celtics team, though, just obviously with you have Derek White, Marcus Smart, Al Horford, all of those guys were out there playing great defense. And even until you got Grant Williams back, who's been okay, because, I mean, obviously he's been out a month, so you weren't expecting him to be Grant Williams from the middle of the season. But still, until you got Grant Williams back, you had Daniel Tice, who played okay. Not bad. Now, obviously, against the going up against the Bucks, if that's what happens, I don't want to. Obviously, you're hoping for more minutes from Robert Williams in this case, but I all around defensively, they just locked down this Nets team, and of course, they came up clutch too, not just on defense but on offense. It was such a clutch performance against a team that is so much better than their seeding was. And this is where I think Jason Tatum is taking the next step forward and taking that torch, so to speak. I already thought probably the way that he finished this year in the regular season that he had made that ascension, but now it's even validated even further when you take down Durant and take down Kyrie Irving, guys that say whatever you want about their attitudes, about their style, how they comport themselves, but still those are elite talents out there. And you can say what you want if Kevin Durant looked tired and looked old or whatever you want to say, but it's still Kevin Durant, who is one of the best players in the NBA history. And the Celtics just absolutely dismantled them. Yes, I know the scores were close, but the way things went in these last 3 games, it just was, to me, it was just no contest, just because the Nets have no bench. And when KD and Kyrie left the floor, it was absolute barren wasteland except for one night of Brown. Other than that, it was just pretty much Celtics domination in the series. And like I said, I know the scoreboard, if you look at it, like, oh, they didn't blow them out in any of these games, but they just absolutely took their soul from them. And I'll be excited to see how this series against Milwaukee turns out, because that's pretty much who I think I don't think Chicago is going to have some miracle and come back down from 3-1, but we'll see how that rolls here for the Boston Celtics. Of course, you have to deal with the MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo, but the big good thing is that that Chris Middleton, might be out for an extended period of time here, so the Celtics may miss him. Not sure if maybe he might be able to come back later on in the series, but he's out. And now that the Celtics have Time Lord and Robert Williams back, you'll have your best defensive asset out there. And hopefully, if he's close to 100%, then that would be a boon for them facing off against Giannis. But of course, we'll break that series down here a little bit more next week when we don't have a special going on since we're getting into the NFL draft. But of course, I wanted to obviously touch on that Celtics team as they were amazing. Now, switching over to the Boston Red Sox here before we get into the NFL draft, I just have to say, this last week and a half, have just been utter disappointment in this team. I have dropped so many F-bombs watching these Red Sox games lately. It's not even funny. So Saturday night's game or Saturday afternoon's game, the Red Sox were playing the Tampa Bay Rays down in Tampa. And I was coming back from Boston from an event. I had to go there super early in the morning. Didn't get back until, 6:30 that night or whatever it was, close to 7, I'm not sure. But anyways, point being that when I was watching that game, that was the one where the Red Sox were no hit into the 9th inning, but they came back. Neither team had scored in the 9th inning, and the Bobby Dahlbeck gets the runner in. They're up by 2, and then they lose on a walk-off in the top of the 10th inning. And then, of course, this Toronto series, the bullpen has absolutely been abysmal. Hansel Robles, you can't rely on him to pitch every single day. You have to have more than one guy in that bullpen. And of course, what's made this even more exacerbated in this whole thing is that Garrett Whitlock, who has been an absolute stud, and obviously we can have the conversation maybe some other day, but Garrett Whitlock, who has been this year, he's been your best weapon. And I know if people want him to go in the starting rotation, or if you want to keep him out in the bullpen. For this year, I said you have to keep him in the bullpen. Next year, you can seriously think about putting him into that starting rotation. But for this year, he's too valuable for you out of that bullpen in that late inning role. Multiple innings, he can pitch for you. If you need him to close, he certainly can. And I mean, he would probably be their best closer, one of the best closers in the league, in my opinion. But he's a little bit more valuable because you can stretch him out and pitch multiple innings in tight situations. But of course, with Tanner Houck having to miss the Toronto series because he's not vaccinated, that threw everything through a loop. And as we mentioned, obviously Rich Hill losing his father, they had to jumble the rotation even further. So this Red Sox starting rotation and bullpen was really in flux because you had to move Whitlock into the starting rotation for at least one start. And it has been just so frustrating to watch this bullpen. And I know the offense hasn't done them any favors over the stretch. The offense has been ice cold as far as their big bats. other than Xander Bogaerts. Xander Bogaerts is the one guy pretty much on offense that showed up over the last couple weeks and really for all of the season, really. He's hitting 369, 380 something on the season. So he's absolutely raking. He's had, I believe it's been 4 games of 3 hits in a row. It's been ridiculous. He's been good. So good. Really good. Amazing. But when the Red Sox do score runs like last night, they were up 5-2 heading into the 9th inning. And yes, I respect, fear that Blue Jays lineup. They are probably the best lineup in the American League. And right next to the Dodgers, they might have the best lineup in all of baseball. So, of course, I know how good they are, and I respect and fear them. So I'm not going to sit here and just belittle them or anything. But still, when you're in the 9th inning, you're up by 3, even as deadly as that lineup is, you should have somebody that you should be able to turn to in that bullpen where you can go, all right, I know what I have. I feel confident that I can give the ball to closer X and shut this game down and at least not be a tightrope situation. But that's not anywhere close to what the Red Sox are at this standpoint. The Red Sox have, outside of Garrett Whitlock and Robles, outside of those two, they have an awful bullpen. Awful. And I know Diekman has had his moments this year, and maybe I shouldn't throw Strom in there because he's had his moments as well, but still, like I said, they've had their moments, but it's been so frustrating. So frustrating. I can't even tell you how maddening it's been just watching this bullpen, because if you have a tight game heading into the 9th inning, which that's been a lot of these situations going in lately, because that's the other frustrating part is that when the offense does score you runs, as little as it has been lately, the bullpen just has not stood up not been able to stand up to these opposing lineups. That's been the problem. And yes, I know, like I said, I know how good Toronto's lineup is, but still, when you're having a 3-run lead in the 9th, you should have more than just one guy in Robles that's out there that you should be able to rely on. And obviously, I know if Whitlock was there, then you probably would have turned to Whitlock and you would have had Robles for the 9th. That's how it would have gone. So this whole stupid COVID thing in Canada is just really, it sucks. And I'm not going to sit here, and I know some people want to sit there and blame Tanner Houck for the whole situation and not getting vaccinated. It's his fault, blaming him. But I'm not going to go that route. I'm not. I won't. I refuse to go and blame that person, because it's everybody's choice. Yes, does it suck? And did I think about this all day? Have I thought about it for a while when it comes to Tanner Houck? I wouldn't call him selfish, but of course, this is something as a professional athlete that you have to sit down and think about seriously, because of course, especially if you're a baseball player and you're in the American League East, and you have to go to, let alone if you play for the Blue Jays, but if you're the Red Sox, Yankees, Orioles, and Rays, and you have to go up to Toronto 9 times during the year, you have to be vaccinated. Well, not have to, but you should be, or that you would need it, because obviously, especially if you're a superstar or if you're somebody that you're relying on, you're going to put your team in a tight spot. But then again, if you believe in something, then of course, then I mean, I can't say you not to do that. So that's where it was so tough, just because, trust me, I was in that situation of, I didn't know if I was going to get the vaccination or not. I was kind of in the boat that I wasn't going to, and I finally did because I had to for work, and obviously thought it out. And there were a lot of things that happened, and it was, trust me, it's a long, arduous discussion that I'm not going to get into here, and because it's everybody's choice. And either way, if you have it or you don't have it, I don't care. I don't give a shit if you have it or not. I really don't. But this was just one of those situations where it really put the Red Sox in a really tough position to be in. But regardless, though, the one thing that I know everybody's harped on that all day, harped on Tanner Houck, and I think he's been unfairly victimized in this situation, because if you want to point the finger at somebody, you shouldn't be pointing it at Tanner Houck. You really shouldn't, because that's his situation. It's his idea. It's his decision of what to do. And excuse me, he made his choice. But who you should point him at is Chaim Bloom, the Red Sox president of baseball operations. You knew the bullpen was an issue last year. You knew it was an issue. You knew all season long. Well, after the All-Star break, that bullpen was hot garbage outside of Garrett Whitlock, and that was pretty much it. That was really it. Well, because last year was Garrett Whitlock and Tanner Houck were in the bullpen. So you had Garrett Whitlock and Tanner Houck in the bullpen. And those were your reliable relievers. Then every now and then you'd have a good outing from Robles. But last year, Robles' command was god-awful, missing the strike zone really bad. And now, this year, it's been a lot better, and he's been actually really good. But last year, Robles wasn't what he was now. So you had two guys you had to rely on. Your closer in Matt Barnes, after the All-Star break, was awful. It was just amazing to watch how night and day it went from a guy that was striking out, I believe it was a 45 to 54% clip strikeout wise. His fastball was really good in the first half of the season. Then it seemed as though after he got his nomination to the All-Star game, and then after the Red Sox gave him a 2-year extension, he absolutely fell off the face of the earth. Remember that series in Toronto where George Springer, who was off and on injured last year, but of course still a really good player, hit the walk-off home run off of Barnes. And Barnes is doing and basically what happened to Barnes last year is what's still happening this year. He went from trusting the fastball in the first half of the season and being so dominant with it, being able to work with that knuckle curve he has in the split, to going back to what he was in the previous 7 years of his career, where it was nibbling around with the off-speed stuff, nibbling around with that curve and the change in the rest of his pitches, and not having any confidence at all in that, not having any confidence at all in his fastball. It's down to 92, 93, 94, not 96 to 98 miles an hour. There were a couple times I think he touched 99 last year. So something's off. But my whole point here when it comes to this bullpen is in Chaim Bloom is that you have had an opportunity to fix a situation in two ways. If you didn't like the reliever market, if you didn't like that reliever market that was out there, you could have gone and traded for one of those Oakland A's pitchers. And I think you probably should have done both, to be honest. But let's just focus on if you didn't like the free agent market, because it was a little thin. You had a couple high-end guys, and after that, it really wasn't great. But if you were in favor of, if you didn't like what you had, go out and trade, because there were better starters that were on the market. 3 A's pitchers were available. One of them actually still is available, so you could actually still kind of maybe make this right and get Frankie Montas. But if you wanted to get more of a 1-year cheaper option, you could have gone with Chris Bassett, who got traded to the Mets. Was really good last year and is having a pretty solid year so far with the Mets. And then the other one, which is the one I really wanted, that I loved the idea of getting, was Sean Manaea, who's now with the Padres. Manaea might not be the number one ace, but he's a solid. He's at for me at his best. He'd be a great number two on a contending team, and at worst, he's a three. So he's a really good pitcher. I love Sean Manaea. You could have got him probably not for obviously pennies on the dollar, but I think you probably could have got him for 80 cents, 80 to 85 cents on the dollar. I don't think you would have had to given up any top tier prospects. Or if you want to maybe give up, I still don't think you're going to have to give up a boatload here, but if you want to go for Frankie Montas, go for him, or go for any of those, or the Red starters. I know they kind of shut down the market towards the end, but, or search for somebody else out there on the trade market. That's my whole point, is that you could have won out there, traded for a starter who I think you should have got one anyways, because you aren't going to have James Paxton until at least June. And you already know, and Chris Sale does have an injury history. I love Chris Sale to death. When he's healthy, he is a top tier pitcher. I don't know if maybe he's top 5, top 3 like he used to be when he was in his absolute prime, in his mid 20s, late 20s, early 30s, before all the injuries really took their toll. He was an absolute bona fide ace of aces out there. That's how good he was. Now, obviously, he still might be able to find that again, but right now, as it stands, Chris Sale's on the IL. He won't be back until June. You had an opportunity to go get one of those A's pitchers, one of the Reds pitchers. You didn't do that. And then what that would have done for the bullpen is you could have slid maybe Michael Wacha, who actually has been pretty good this year for the Red Sox. Or you could have put Rich Hill out there to lengthen it. Maybe you put Tanner Houck out in the bullpen. You have Tanner Houck and Garrett Whitlock out in the bullpen, at least for this year, and then you can figure things out for next year. But you could, point being is you could flip one of those starters that if you went and got a better number 2, number 3 starter that you could have put in this rotation to go along with Eovaldi, go along with Pivetta, and then when Sale and Paxton, if they're both going to be able to come back this year, well, Chris Sale will be coming back, but depending on what happens with Paxton, as everything looks like he's going to be back from Tommy John in June, then yeah, go ahead, go get one of those guys, and you can slide one of those other unused starters into the bullpen. And then that lengthens it out right there, because you have Whitlock, one of those starters, probably Houck or Wacha out there, and then you're able to keep those guys out in the bullpen. And I would hope it would be Houck and Whitlock, and then you can have Robles out there in the 8th or 9th inning. And that really strengthens it. And then maybe you get somebody coming up from the minors. But I would have felt better about that if they went out and got a starting pitcher, and that would have helped out their bullpen. Or if, like I said, I was more for both, getting one of those cheap A's starters, go out, get one of those, and then look in the bullpen market in free agency. For me, I wanted them to go out and spend the money on Rafael Iglesias, who was the Reds closer and was really good, and it kind of dropped off a little bit going to the A's last year, but he's still a good closer. He's still a good late inning arm. And then, of course, the other one was Kendall Graveman. Kendall Graveman was the one I really wanted. He signed a really cheap deal with the in comparative. It was, I believe, a 3-year deal with the Chicago White Sox. But Graveman, he doesn't have a ton of closing experience, but he has a lot of late inning experience. And he was the Mariners closer last year until he got traded to the Astros. Was a great addition. He's a great late inning arm, and now they signed him there in Chicago. So he's there along with Liam Hendricks, excuse me. Sorry, he's out there with Liam Hendricks to have a nice 1-2 punch. But no, I mean, and then that's where I know things dropped off a little bit there down in that market. But those were just a couple arms to mention a few that you could have gone out and gotten. But again, if you want to blame this whole situation, go blame it on Heimblum. Blame this on Heimblum. He had an opportunity to go out and spend big. Well, not big, but at least go out and make improvements. And yeah, I know he went out and got Jake Diekman and Strawn, but Diekman's been inconsistent with his control. Yeah, his stuff is there as far as the slider and that sinking fastball, but it really he's been wild. He hasn't been reliable from the standpoint of being able to case in point last night walking the bases. And then Strom has had his moments, but other than that, it's just been kind of iffy. So I don't know. It's just maddening. You can go out there and blame Houck all you want for the struggles. You can blame for him not being available. But to me, it shouldn't be on the shoulders of one guy. It should be on the team as a whole, where you weren't prepared. You were ill prepared coming into this season as far as on your pitching staff, and it's showing right now. And I don't think at this moment there's any in-house option. I don't really think there is, as far as that's ready. Because I mean, there are arms that you can be excited of down in AA, AAA, but I mean the closest one is going to be Connor Siebold. But I mean the really impact arms, the Bayo and the Mayo and all of those guys, those flamethrowers, they're not ready yet. So to me, this is where you should have been looking outside all along. And like I mentioned, the Oakland A's had a fire sale, and you didn't go out and even get one of those guys. So I don't know what in the hell Heimblum's plan is for the pitching staff. Whatever it is, you better figure something out. And I just pray to God that you go out and you finally grab yourself by the balls and you go and you call Oakland and you're like, what's it going to take for us to get Frankie Montas? But that's just been what the frustrating part is. This needs to go on the front office for not having a bullpen constructed, for not having a complete starting rotation constructed. That's just been the whole thing for me. Is just this was piss poor planning when it came to the bullpen in the back end of the rotation for the Red Sox. So we'll definitely trust me. We'll definitely talk a lot more about that in the coming weeks here for the Red Sox. Hopefully they can get themselves back on track as we head into the end of this week and into next week, as they, including tonight, have tonight's game and tomorrow's game in Toronto. Then they head to Baltimore before coming home, and I believe they face the Angels for a series in Boston. But it'll hopefully next week I have some good news to report for you when it comes to the Boston Red Sox. Hopefully maybe the offense starts swinging the bats more too. That would be nice. But to the main course, I know we went a little long there, but I kind of got boiled over on that Red Sox team. But without further ado, your main course, the NFL draft. And the NFL draft is scheduled for tomorrow night at 8 o'clock out in Las Vegas, now home of the Raiders and Josh McDaniels and Devontae Adams. So it'll be a fun time out. I'm sure it'll be a hell of a time out there. It'd be a hell of a time if I was able to go out there and be out there in person. Maybe one of these years. Maybe you can get a media pass, show up to the draft. We'll see how it goes. But the New England Patriots are going to be on the clock at pick number 21 in this draft. So it'll be interesting. And before we dive into all the wants, the needs, everything like that, there was a little bit of news as the New England Patriots did make a trade, as they traded away their number 5 pick in the draft to the Houston Texans. Let's see here. Of course, I had this bookmarked earlier, and then, of course, everything goes out of whack. Okay, yep. So that's where the Patriots, they end up trading away their 5th round pick, but they do end up getting they do end up getting 2 picks back here from the Houston Texans. So of course, no shocker there that they go to their old friend in Nick Caserio. So the Houston Texans will be getting the 5th round pick, and the Texans will be sending over their 6th and 7th round pick, the 183rd pick, and the 245th pick to the Patriots. So that gives the Patriots an overview of, in the first round, they have the number 21st pick. Round number 2, they have the 53rd. Round 3, they have the 85th pick. And round 4, they have the 127th pick. Round 5, they had a couple 5th round picks here as well, as they traded one of theirs away. But they have the 5th pick. They still have the round 5 pick. They have is pick 158. Round 6, they have 3. They have the 183rd, 200th, 210th, and lastly in the 7th round, they did pick up the 245th in that trade. So that is a look at what the Patriots will be working at with their draft picks. There is quite a gap in between that 85th and 127th pick. So I'll be curious to see and in between the 2nd round and 3rd round pick. So I would be curious to see if maybe Belichick tries to jump around in there and maybe fill in that hole. And if he tries to fill in some of his needs there later on. But that is how things will shake out for the New England Patriots in the draft as far as their picks. Now, like I said, obviously, I'm not going to bog you down here and say, oh, yeah, they're going to, who they're going to pick in the 6th and 7th round, 5th round, all that stuff. But we'll focus on like the first couple rounds here. And of course, like I said, the Patriots will be on the clock tomorrow night, maybe in about what would amount from 20, 30 minutes from now, I would imagine, with being that 21st pick, maybe somewhere in that 9:30 to 10:15 range, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we're getting close to where the time slot as far as where the Patriots will be next week to make their pick. Now, of course, this is one of those drafts, not just Patriots, but as far as all the picks, there's no franchise quarterback. There's not even a quarterback that is in Mac Jones's territory. There's really not like last year where there was Trevor Lawrence, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, those 5 and Zach Wilson. There's those 5 quarterbacks would be head and shoulders above any of the quarterbacks in this draft class. I'm not saying that there aren't some intriguing ones like, excuse me, like Kenny Pickett for the University of Pittsburgh. I do like him. I know obviously all the memes and jokes out there about small hands. So smell of cabbage, or maybe in for some other things. But we digress. The whole point here when it comes to this quarterback, what I'm making here is that there are not a lot of top tier quarterbacks. There are some intriguing ones, but I don't know there's any of them that you would want to, in my opinion, that would warrant a 1st round pick, or at the least, maybe if I was one of those ones at the end of a draft in the late 20s, mid to late 20s, if I had an aging star quarterback that I needed to replace, I might go after a Kenny Pickett or any of these others that are out there. But if they intrigue you, but there's really none that I just jump off the page. And then, of course, there's no generational superstar talent either. Kind of like it's not like there's a Calvin Johnson that's going to be taken fifth, or a Jamar Chase like there was last year, or somebody like from that standpoint, or not like even like a Darrelle Revis or any of these like super. Obviously, there are guys that are stars that I really like, that I think are number ones, as like number one receivers or number one edge rushers or guys like that. But I don't think there's that consensus number one, number two type of guy that's out there that's available in this draft. That, if you like, in this case, with the Jacksonville Jaguars, that they're like, oh God, we're so happy we have like last year when they had Trevor Lawrence, that they were happy that they had number one, that they won that sweepstakes. This year, it's a little bit different here for the league in total, just because it really there's nobody that you can really kind of pinpoint and put your finger on when it comes to that first overall pick. Now, of course, there is a lot that's kind of popping off right before we go to the draft, of course, but now the number one overall pick is maybe going to be Trayvon Walker, the former Georgia Bulldog. And of course, a lot of the mock drafts early on had Kayvon Thibodeau as well slated for that first pick. But it's all in now Aiden Hutchinson, who I loved Aiden Hutchinson, watching him at Michigan. So we'll see if maybe he kind of gets into that conversation as well. But it really has not been, there's really no consensus number one. But it is intriguing, though. From this standpoint, I know I've kind of talked around in circles here about, there's no number one, there's no true number one, there's none of this, none of that. It's not like one of the best drafts ever, but I still think there's quite a bit of good talent, though, that can be taken from this, especially for me in the areas that the Patriots need, because the needs for the Patriots are obviously to get a corner, a franchise corner, get young and fast at linebacker if you can, and obviously get a true number one weapon, hopefully in the form of a wide receiver. And now with the trade, and obviously with the trade of Shaq Mason to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you're now in the market for a guard and offensive lineman. So there's another need that you created for yourself. And I think you might even put a pass catching running back in there, just because James White is getting up there in age. You don't need a actual every down back or a power back, because you have that in Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson. So you're good to go in that department. And maybe you get like another running back, maybe a all around type of running back later on in the draft, because Damian Harris is going to be set to be a free agent after this year. But we'll see how things kind of shake out. That would kind of lower down the list. But for me, there's four positions now with guard. But so the positions that you'd have to put them in would be corner, linebacker, wide receiver, and now a guard. Now, of course, the sexy pick is to go after a wide receiver or a corner. But really, the big sexy would be a wide receiver in this case. Now, that's where this is going to be tough, really tough, because you have some interesting teams in front of you that have multiple picks, and that would be the Philadelphia Eagles and the New Orleans Saints. Now, Philadelphia, I know, they've gone to the Detroit Lions route of taking multiple first-round wide receivers in back-to-back years, taking Jalen Reagor, who hasn't really worked out, and taking Devontae Smith, who I think is going to be a pretty good wide receiver. But still, I think they're kind of in that market of maybe getting that other number 2 now that Rager hasn't really worked out. So there's, or maybe depending on how they view Devontae Smith as well, if he, depending on if they think that he's going to last long term there. So, but like, even though they've taken wide receivers in back-to-back years, there's still a lot of maybe he would be the one that they might go after wide receiver. And now a lot of the buzz is going to be around Garrett Wilson, Traylon Burks, Jamison Williams. And of course, if you go looking at the New Orleans Saints, they, regardless if they have Michael Thomas, if he actually wants to come back and play for them, you're going to run into the issue of they really don't have a secondary weapon. Well, a secondary, they don't have another wide receiver or tight end that they can rely on. And then if Thomas doesn't come back or he wants to be traded, he wants out, then they have nobody outside of Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara is kind of dealing with his own legal situation after the Pro Bowl. So there hasn't been any word on that, but obviously if he gets cleared and he's ready to go for the season, then and you don't have Michael Thomas, then it's pretty much going to be the Alvin Kamara show, which, I mean, for my fantasy purposes, I would be happy with that, because if everything's running through him from that standpoint. But obviously, though, they don't have a lot going on. It's Michael Thomas and Kamara. There's really no other help there. And of course, depending on how things go down there in New Orleans, what they end up doing long term at quarterback, you're going to need to help out that your signal caller, just because you really outside, like, because again, if Michael Thomas doesn't come back and he's still pouting, then they're really screwed there at wide receiver, because I really don't like the rest of their options that they have in Traquan Smith. He really has been not all that great. And then the rest of it's kind of been some spare parts that they've been dealing with down there wide receiver. So the point being there is that Philadelphia is looking for one. New Orleans could use one. And then what you also have to look out for is that Kansas City traded away Tyreek Hill. They definitely, and their number one wide receiver is Juju Smith-Schuster, who I don't mind Juju. I think he kind of got exposed after having to be put in the number 1 spot after Antonio Brown left. And of course, he got passed by Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. So he's I mean I would take him on the Patriots, but I wouldn't be putting him in the number 1 spot. I think he'd be competing with Kendrick Bourne, Jacoby Myers for like that 2nd spot. But the point being is that Kansas City needs a true number 1 wide receiver now that they lost out, now that they traded away Tyreek Hill to the Dolphins. And of course, Green Bay is right around in that same vicinity of that 29-30 range in that territory, the late 20s. They're like 25, 26. They traded away Devontae Adams, who wanted out. Now he's in Vegas. So they really don't have anybody out there, out in Green Bay. So they're going to draft somebody in the first 2 rounds. And if it's not the first round, I would be shocked. And the reason even though those 2 teams are behind you in the draft, the reason I bring that up is that they have draft capital where they can leapfrog you, get ahead of you in the draft. So that's the part that worries me there, is that as much as I want one of those wide receivers, as much as I would love to have a Jamison Williams, a Drake London, a Chris Olave, or Garrett Wilson, Traylon Burks, one of those guys, it's going to be difficult, at least in my thought process, it's going to be difficult for you, just because you're going to have probably 4 teams that really could use a wide receiver that are ahead of you, or 2 of them that are ahead of you, and 2 of them that behind you that have some capital that they could maybe trade up to one of those teams that has multiple first-round picks and leapfrog you, get into the teens, get one of those guys. Or the thing that would really infuriate me, that would frustrate me, is that they're on the board at 21. They either take a offensive tackle or a defensive line, defensive lineman, unless it's Jordan from Georgia. He's a freak, and I would love to have him. But if it's like some other defensive lineman outside of out of Jordan, or an offensive lineman, then they take that in the first round, and then the pick right after them at 22 is the Packers or one of those other teams that moved up, and they end up taking Jameson Williams if he's still on the board, or Olave, or Drake London, who are my favorite three. I would be so pissed, because that's 3 years in a row, basically, that I've watched guys go off the board that I've been like, I really wanted them there. Now, the one that's always going to stick in my craw, the one that always is going to be the one that got away in this whole scenario, is Justin Jefferson. The Patriots, I think, were at pick 23, 22, 23 back in the 2020 draft. Now, I know they traded out and they got some second round picks, and I know Kyle Duggar he's been a pretty good safety, and he's been a pretty good developmental guy. But would you rather have Kyle Duggar, or if you have that 22nd, somewhere between that 21st to 23rd pick, wherever they were that year, and Minnesota ends up within that same range? I think it was 22 or 23 that they drafted him at. So you had a legitimate shot to get Justin Jefferson, either just one spot, you leapfrog Minnesota, or if it was at 23 and you traded out and that's where Minnesota moved up to, that's where that drives me. And that one always will stick in my craw. I'm always going to be pissed off about that one, because you had a chance to get one of the best young wide receivers, and he's developed himself into one of the best all-around wide receivers in the league in Justin Jefferson, and you let him slip away. And of course, we all know the 2019 draft where they picked N'Keal Harry, but all those guys, the DK Metcalfs, the AJ Browns, the Deebo Samuels, the Deontay Johnsons, all those guys that they just absolutely whiffed on, and they took a guy in N'Keal Harry who is barely past the 500 receiving yard mark in his career, and he's been around for 3 effing years. Jesus Christ. Jeez, that one just pissing me off. You can't even 3 years in a row, and then obviously last year with all the Jamar Chases, the Jalen Waddles. I know those guys went early on in the draft, but still, the point for me is that that's 3 drafts where stud wide receivers have been taken, and you've come up nothing. Big old nothing burger. Absolutely nothing. And it's just pissing me off. It really is. I just can't get over it. Now, this is where I know some people have been scared away because of it, because they've had a bad track record of taking wide receivers. But you can't be scared. This is where, in my opinion, they should go out and get one of those guys if they're on the board. Will they do it? I don't know. I'm not sure. But again, when we kind of talk about my wants kind of part here, this is where I'll talk a little bit more about them. But as far as the rest of this draft, like I mentioned, the dream scenario of getting a number 1 wide receiver in the first round, that might be a little tough. And then the other tough part there is going to be corner, because really it's 3 corners in this draft, in Derek Stingley, Devin Sauce Gardner, and the corner out of Washington, that everybody that have been the corner out of Washington has been mocked to the Patriots. But those 3 corners have been the ones that have all been the first round corners that have all been kind of mocked in that area. But The problem is Gardner, in my opinion, is like a top 5, top 8 pick. So they're in that they're in that they're kind of in that mold here. Go. All right, sorry about that. Just got a notification here. Okay, so you had Derek Stingley, Ahmad, Sauce Gardner, and Trent McDuffie. Okay, there we go, Trent McDuffie, and then Andrew Booth. Okay, so you could throw those in there because Booth has kind of been going up and down a little bit, but I think those three and Gardner, McDuffie, and Stingley, those are the ones that we all kind of harp on, or we're all kind of focusing on. And for me, Gardner, I think is going to is going to be the first pick, the first corner off the board, I should say, not the first pick, but the first corner off the board. Then after that, it's going to be Stingley, because I think there's been some up and down on Stingley. He came in as a freshman, was looked at as the best corner in college football, and there really was a lot of hype around him. And then he kind of fell off a little bit, and obviously he missed some time, not because he had COVID, but because of the COVID season. So it's been a little up and down. But again, I think those are the two clear-cut first two in this class. And then you have Trent McDuffie, who has a little bit of issue, is not the tallest corner, is 5'11", and there's kind of the issue with the arms, but I really don't kind of buy into that. Patriots have some corners that have had some height issue, had some shorter arms that have done well with them, and Malcolm Butler as one case. So, but the point being is that that's one of those areas that another area in need for the Patriots where they might be able to, where they might not get the opportunity to get one of those top tier guys, because they might be off the board before they get to them. And you might kind of be left with that with the fourth, fifth corner on the board that you might think of highly, but you might have a second round grade on them. So that'll be interesting. So that's right there with wide receiver. Those are two ones that I think are going to be highly sought after, and you might get the not bottom of the barrel, but you might get the second round. You might get the next tier, the second round guys that are available for you in that class. Now, linebacker is one area where they might have a little bit better luck, because going into the draft season, Nicolby Dean and Devin Lloyd were the top two linebackers by far. Now, Nicolby Dean, with the great national championship game he had against Alabama, really picked up a lot of steam. The athleticism, yeah, he might be a little undersized at 6'1", and he's only 220, 230 some odd pounds. A little small for linebacker, but still, he's the modern day speed and athleticism and run around the field and make all these plays instead of that big thumper like the Patriots used to love having on their roster, like Dante Hightower, the Teddy Bruschi's, the Gerard Mayos, the Brandon Spikes, those kind of guys. But this is where you might get a little lucky, because I've seen Nicolby Dean, at least in some of those mock drafts by some of the so-called experts, has kind of fallen down a little bit. He's kind of fallen out of like that top 10-ish area, at least in some people's drafts. So if he's there, so Nicolby Dean is there, I would love to have him. And Devin Lloyd, the other linebacker, is right in that situation, kind of same situation as well. He might be available later on in the draft. And he's the bigger linebacker. He's in that 240 range, closer to 250. He didn't test as well on some of those 3 cone drills, which the Patriots love, but he's instinctual. He's a big guy. So that's more of the prototypical Patriots linebacker as far as Devin Lloyd. But in my opinion, I would rather take Nicolby Dean, because now with having to face Josh Allen, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, just to name some guys that are just in your division. I know obviously you're not going to put a linebacker on a wide receiver, but if he has to, at least maybe when he's coming over the middle in the slot, you might be able to use the speed of Nicolby Dean. But of course, obviously, definitely take advantage if you're going to have to play Josh Allen a lot. Get that speed of Nicolby Dean. So linebacker might be the most obtainable of those needs that you might be able to get without either trying to mortgage the farm to move up or trading back and kind of getting the runt of the litter, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But to me, this is where I have the feeling that they're going to trade out. I just do. I don't think this is going to be a situation. I think we're all going to be disappointed. To me, there's truer outcomes that I think is going to happen. I think the first one that they're going to trade out because this is one of those quote unquote drafts that's deep or has a lot of talent in that 10 to 60 pick range. So the Patriots might use that value chart of theirs and try to see what they have or see what kind of falls to them. And maybe they might be able to get some other picks and pick a couple guys in the second round. So they might end up doing that. And I would, unless like Devin Lloyd or Nicolby Dean slips out and goes into the second round, and then you still have John Mechie there or another Sky Moore or one of these other wide receivers. If that happens, then I would, unless that scenario kind of comes to play, I would be upset if they trade out. Or the one that would really irritate me, the one that would piss me off and push me over the edge is going to be if they draft an offensive lineman first round. Now, yes, I know they're important. I understand they do, and I know I said that's one of their areas of need after trading away Shaq Mason. But to me, you need to get younger and athletic on defense. You need to get playmakers on both sides of the ball, on defense and offense. And obviously, offense, the easiest way is going to be to get one of those wide receivers. And defensively, it's going to be going after a corner or going after a linebacker to make those plays. So that's why you kind of hone in on those, because you're devoid in those areas and you really need to get playmakers. So if you kind of go after the big fat body, even if it's a Zion Johnson who's getting rave reviews, I still would be upset that that's what they go with. So we'll see kind of how things shake out here for the Patriots and what they do. But I'm just crossing my fingers tomorrow night and hoping that I'm not F-bombing on my, if I should probably be home by that time when I get home from batting practice, but for my men's league. But I'm just hoping I'm not watching it on whatever network I choose to watch it on and just MF and the TV when they take an offensive lineman. But like I said, I just have a feeling this is just, we're going to be disappointed. We're going to hype this up like, oh yeah, there's one of those wide receivers that I was hoping for, and that's going to be the other layer that adds to this. So, I mean, just let alone if they trade out, or let alone if there's an offensive lineman there and they take him. If one of those situations comes to pass, if it's they trade out or they take an offensive lineman, but God forbid Jamison Williams is sitting there, Drake London sitting there, Olave sitting there. If one of those guys is still on the board and they take a freaking offensive lineman, I'm going to lose my ever-loving mind. Or if Nicolby Dean, Devin Lloyd, Sauce Gardner, or Derek Stingley are there, then yes, I don't think I'm going to lose my mind. I'm just going to put it that way. I'm going to lose my mind. But I think if you really kind of look at, like, so if we kind of throw those situations out and you're kind of looking at their needs and what they would do, Obviously, I think if you rank them, I think it's going to be corner, linebacker, receiver. And I think realistically, drafting in the first round, I could see them maybe if it falls to them, I think that's where if Derek Stingley is on the board still, then they would take Derek Stingley. I think that would be probably Belichick's dream. I think not our dream scenario, because my dream scenario is to get that wide receiver. But I think realistically, Belichick's dream scenario is going to be having that corner on the board and having Derek Stingley there. So if he's there, Belichick, I think, is going to run to the podium and he's going to call that in. And I think that's going to be what's going to happen for. Well, I think that's what Belichick would love to happen is to have that corner on the board. Like I said, realistically, I think those guys are going to be gone by then. A lot of those wide receivers, I think, are unfortunately going to be gone at that standpoint, as much as I want one of them. But this is where I think the Patriots take advantage. So I think this is where I'm going to predict this one, and I'm probably going to be wrong. But this is where I see those linebackers kind of falling down the board in this case, because I think with just how pass happy the league is, obviously the wide receivers and corners are going to be the first ones to go outside of like quarterbacks and like stud defensive linemen, pass rushers. So I think this is what's going to happen. I think those linebackers are going to fall. And I think this is where Belichick has finally kind of come to the realization that you can't have you can have thumpers. You can have a couple thumpers, maybe in your linebacking core, but you have to have speed and athleticism there now. I think he tried to do that with Jamie Collins back in 2013, but I still think he wanted size. He wanted the unicorn of having size and speed and everything all wrapped in one, which I can't blame him for that. I mean, the closest thing you're going to see that in this day and age with everything kind of in that package is going to be Micah Parsons, but he's not overly huge either. He's not small, but he's more kind of a hybrid, kind of in the middle. But I think that's where Belichick kind of realizes that you need that young, fast, athletic, maybe a little bit undersized linebacker. So this is where my official pick, put me on the board for the first round, is going to be Nicolby Dean, the linebacker out of Georgia, is going to be the Patriots pick. Now I'm probably going to he's probably going to go early in the draft, or I'm probably just going to, the Patriots going to trade out. That's going to be my luck. But my official pick is going to be Nicolby Dean, the linebacker from Georgia. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these picks here, because I would like to go to bed here in the next day. But I think just where probably just looking in the next couple rounds, I think the next best thing here for the Patriots is if you go get Nicolby Dean, you can fill one need. And then that's where I think Belichick, he's smart enough to understand that, yes, I did go out and get Devontae Parker, a physical wide receiver, but I still don't have a true number one. And that's where John Mechie, I don't know if he is your classic number one or if he's a true number one, but I think this is a guy that I think his 40 time speed was a little misleading because it was a little faster, because I think it was like 4.39, I think it was. I think he's probably more of like a 4.42 or something, but he's fast. He's got speed. I don't think he's like super fast, but I don't think he's not like his teammate in Jamison Williams, who I'd love to have. But this is a guy in John Mechie that he already has a rapport with Mac Jones. This is a guy that I think you can play him in the slot, play him outside. I know people are, oh yeah, play him inside, outside, like Edelman, but I think he's got more outside tendencies than he does inside. I think he's like 6 foot. He's 6 even or 6'1", so he's not overly tall. But this is a guy that I think just all of his intangibles. He's got good enough speed. He's a good route runner. He's a guy that knows how to get open. Got a rapport with Mac Jones, and I think this is a guy that really could develop. Maybe not year number one, but maybe he kind of turns the corner and becomes one of those second round draft picks, like everybody thought, like a Deebo Samuel and AJ Brown, who AJ Brown had knocks on his game, which he's turned himself into a stud wide receiver. DK Metcalf had knocks on his game. So I think that maybe with John Mechie, I think that could be the situation with John Mechie where you get him into a situation where he's comfortable with the quarterback. He's comfortable probably with the coaching staff because it's like being at Alabama. The only thing there is that he's dealing with ACL injury, but for me, this is building long term. And I don't want to pass up on a guy just for short term gratification. I'd rather have somebody here long term. That's got kind of what pisses me off with some of the, like Jameson Williams or some of the other discussions with some of the hurt guys. For this is where you have to take a chance. You can't, if you think this guy is a stud, you have to go out, you have to sign, you have to draft him if you think he can contribute and do this long term. So I like what I think is you get Nicolby Dean, or you maybe go Devin Lloyd, whichever one of those is on the board, whichever one you like. I think if you get like I said, I'm officially taking Nicolby Dean, and this is where in this situation, maybe if you're the Patriots and you hear maybe that John Mechie is gonna be maybe kind of thought or sought after earlier in like maybe the mid to late 30s or early 40s, because right now you have the 57, was it the 54th, somewhere between that 54th, 57th pick. So if you maybe take some of that late round draft capital and you move up and you go after a John Mechie or maybe a Sky Moore or one of those other wide receivers that you like. But for my next pick, it would be John Mechie in that case. But so that's what I think the Patriots should end up doing, is kind of go that linebacker route, then go get that wide receiver in John Mechie. And is maybe in this case, what my dream scenario for the second round is, you go up into you take some of the, if you, let's say that you don't have to trade to get Mechie, if Mechie falls, maybe you take that opportunity, trade up into the second round, and you use that currency to get, if a Trent McDuffie's still there, or an Adrian Booth, or the one that's probably a little bit more realistic that I still would like is Kaiir Elam, who he's a bigger, a little bit more physical, kind of lanky corner who played in the SEC. So I think that's for me, that's a situation that if Kaiir Elam is on the board, that's where I would do that. I would maybe forego some of those later round picks that you have and kind of go up and get some of that impact talent. So if you get a Nicolby Dean, a Kaiir Elam, and then you also get obviously John Mechie, the rest of the draft, I don't care what happens in that case. I think you've got three studs. Not that I don't care, but I think if you can do that, I would love to see that happen. But my takeaways from the draft are, or my not takeaways, but my PowerPoint or my bullet points, if you want to put it that way, would be to go out, get athletic, get speed, get playmakers on both sides of the ball. And in my opinion, if you can come away, what you have to do is get a playmaker on defense and get a playmaker on offense, or at least guys that you think can be that. And honestly, you can't go 4 years in a row, because this is another one of those wide receiver classes that everybody thinks is going to be pretty good. You can't go 4 years in a row without getting one of those playmaking wide receivers. Yes, I know they tried to with N'Keal Harry, but they absolutely whiffed. And you can't not go back into those waters. You have to dive back in. You have to take that you have to take a shot. You have to try. You have to at least try in this situation. And so in my opinion, my big take, other than trying to get those playmakers, what I really want them to see is, if it's in the first or second round, the third round at the latest. So in the first 3 rounds, you have to make sure you come away with a wide receiver, because you can't just play the, oh, I'm going to take a guy in the 5th or the 6th or the 7th round and throw a dart. Yes, I know it's worked out. I know that's how they got Julian Edelman. I know that's how they got other guys in the past, David Givens, other solid wide receivers that have come out and played pretty well for them. But you're not always going to find the Edelmans. You're not always going to find those diamonds. Not always. Sometimes you have to pay the premium to get those premium players. So that's where, if they're in those first 3 rounds, and if you really like the guy, and especially like I'm saying with these wide receivers, this is where you have to, in the first 3 rounds, come away with one of those wide receivers that you think can be a difference maker, because this team is just, they have, now that they have Devontae Parker, it does push the rest of them down there. So I like their receiving core more than I did before we got to closer to this, before probably like a month ago, before that trade went down. But still, it's just missing that one guy that really can break the game open on offense. So this is where I think those first 3 rounds you have to get it. But again, my plan, come away with young, athletic playmakers on both sides of the ball. So if they come away, like, I won't be disappointed if they come away with a defensive, if they come away with a corner, linebacker, or wide receiver in the first round, if they stay in the first round. So if they come away with one of those, like in my scenario, if you draft Nicolby Dean, who I put down as my official pick for the Patriots at pick 21, and then you come away with John Mechie, and you find a way to trade up and get one of those, maybe in one of the top 5 corners that's still left on the board, kind of like what they did last year, and trade up and you get a excuse me, Christian Barmore, then I would be happy. So that is what I am going to predict here for the Patriots. Now, like I said, I am probably going to be so wrong in this case. I hope I'm not, or maybe in the best way, maybe I hope I'm wrong, and maybe they get a Jameson Williams or get a Drake London, get a Chris Olave, because that would be, if they get one of those 3 guys, I would die and go to heaven, because that would be, that would be the dream scenario. That would be amazing, because that, if you get a Jameson Williams, a Drake London, or Chris Olave, those, in my opinion, are the 3 best receivers in this class. I know everybody wants to talk about Garrett Wilson and Treylon Burks, but to me, those 3, the Williams, the London, and the Olave, those are my favorite. Those, I think, are going to be the best. So if that happens, then I will be so happy. I'll be 6 to midnight on that one, if you know what I mean. That would be so exciting. But I mean, obviously, I hope it happens. It'd be amazing. But like I said, as long as they come away with, I would be happy. Like I said, I would just be happy if they come away with a corner, linebacker, because they need those so bad. You already have your quarterback of the future in Mac Jones that you got last year. So now it's just about accumulating and getting more talent onto this team. And you have to do it. And obviously, like I said, I want to see him do it, getting those athletes onto this team, those playmakers. So, like I said, if you get one of those 3 that I mentioned earlier, I'll be happy with how this draft turns out. All right, that is going to do it for this week's episode of New England Sports Weekly. As mentioned, we touch on a lot here today. Obviously, next week we will break down the Patriots haul that they accumulated in the draft, see who they picked up, who's going to be putting on that Patriots helmet and jersey for the first time. And of course, we will be previewing, or depending on if that series starts on Sunday, we'll be breaking down that first round, or previewing the first round for the Boston Celtics, most likely against the Milwaukee Bucks. And of course, the Boston Bruins, will be definitely previewing the Boston Bruins as well. And maybe they might even start their playoff series as well. We'll see how things kind of shake out for them. So we'll have a couple between the Bruins and the Celtics. We'll have the first round for the Bruins to preview, and the second round for the Boston Celtics against most likely the Bucks, and hopefully the Boston Red Sox. get things back on track so I can keep my sanity and I'm not F-bombing the TV every 5 seconds. So we will definitely keep you abreast of everything going on in Boston sports. And until then, next week, have a good evening and enjoy your week. And as always, like and subscribe for the show on YouTube and like and subscribe for the show on Spotify and on SoundCloud as well. And always send me any questions on my handle on Twitter and at Instagram, which is, you can see below, is at Sean_Met28, or the show Twitter account at NE Sports Weekly. Send me any of your questions, comments, or hell, if you have any complaints about the show, send it in, whatever. Like to see the comments, whatever they are, positive, negative, whatever, constructive. I don't care. As long as you're watching and enjoying the show, that's fine with me. But like I said, enjoy your week, everybody, and I will see you next week for another episode of New England Sports Weekly.